Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport on an April morning in 2025 was a chaotic canvas of colors and sounds. Streams of hurried travelers dragged their suitcases through the walkways. Flight announcements echoed non-stop, blending with chatter, crying children, and the rhythmic hum of rolling suitcase wheels on polished tile floors. Sunlight streamed through the large glass panels above, reflecting off advertisement boards and the weary faces of passengers. Everyone was caught up in their own worlds, a businessman yelling into his phone, a family scrambling to check their documents, a group of college students laughing loudly with backpacks slung over their shoulders. The atmosphere was alive with the pulse of modern life, yet indifferent, as people focused solely on reaching their destinations. Amidst the crowd, Colonel David Carter stood still, a striking presence against the swirling movement around him. At 52, he was a seasoned U.S. Army veteran, his short-cropped salt and pepper hair and weathered face bearing the marks of years spent on the battlefield. He was dressed in full military uniform, a dark blue jacket adorned with gleaming medals, neatly pressed trousers, and polished shoes that shone under the airport lights. On his left shoulder, a small black ribbon was pinned with care, a symbol of loss and respect. His deep-set eyes, solemn and steady, were fixed on the entrance to the security checkpoint, where he was about to carry out a sacred duty, escorting the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, a young soldier who had perished in an explosion overseas. Back home, David Carter was no stranger to death. In his 30 years of service, he had witnessed too many comrades fall, from the dusty battlefields of the Middle East to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. He had once commanded an infantry battalion, leading hundreds of soldiers through grueling combat, and had brought home a chest full of medals, silver stars, Purple Hearts, and more. But today's mission was unlike any he had undertaken before. It required no weapons or strategy, only solemnity, reverence, and a heart heavy with the burden of grief shared with Jason Reynolds' family. He had spoken with the young soldier's parents over the phone the night before, the mother's voice trembling with sorrow, the father's words shaky as he thanked David for bringing their son home. "This is the last thing we can do for him," the father had said, and David could feel the weight of that promise settle on his shoulders. Private First Class Jason Reynolds was only 22 when he fell in battle. He was a passionate young soldier who enlisted right after high school, driven by a dream to serve his country and lift his family out of poverty in a small Alabama town. In his letters home, he wrote about the camaraderie among his fellow soldiers, the freezing nights at a distant base, and his hope of one day returning home in glory. But fate never gave him that chance. An improvised explosive device claimed his life, along with 2 other soldiers, during a routine patrol. When David received orders to escort Jason's remains, he spent the entire night going through the young soldier's file, photos of him smiling brightly, notes from commanding officers praising his courage, and an unsent letter meant for his mother. It read, "Mom, I'll be home soon." After reading it, David sat in silence, his hands gripping the insignia on his uniform, his heart heavy with the weight of the young man's sacrifice. Now, at the airport, David stood beside a flag-draped casket, placed carefully on a specialized military transport cart. The American flag lay neatly folded, its white stars shining against the deep blue field, the red and white stripes symbolizing the blood and loyalty of those like Jason. Nearby, 2 airport staff members stood with their heads bowed in silent respect. But the world around them remained oblivious. A hurried traveler brushed against the cart, muttering an absent-minded apology before rushing off. A group of teenagers laughed as they took selfies, unaware of the significance of the casket before them. The stark contrast between the airport's chaotic, indifferent energy and the solemnity of David's mission filled him with a deep sorrow. He placed a firm hand on the corner of the casket and whispered, "We're taking you home, Jason, I promise." David checked his watch, 45 minutes until departure. The commercial flight would take him and Jason's remains to a small airport near the soldier's hometown, where his family and an honor guard would be waiting. He had done this duty many times before, and the process was usually smooth. Airlines prioritized these solemn journeys, treating fallen soldiers with the highest level of respect. But today, an unshakable sense of unease settled in David's chest, a vague premonition he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was exhaustion from the past few days of preparation, or perhaps the relentless noise of the airport was making him restless. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. There was no time for doubt. Jason deserved to be brought home with honor. And David would make sure that happened. David pushed the casket cart toward the security checkpoint, his steps slow but steady. His military uniform drew a few glances, some nodded in respect, while others gave a brief, curious look before turning away. He paid them no mind. His only focus was completing this mission, bringing Jason home, and handing the folded flag to his parents with the promise that their son's sacrifice was not in vain. But as he neared the counter, a middle-aged airline employee with a cold expression and impatient eyes stepped forward, raising a hand to stop him. "You can't go through here," the man said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. David stopped, his brow furrowing, that uneasy feeling in his chest now sharper than ever. The airport remained noisy, people rushed past in every direction. But for a brief moment, David's world shrank down to just him, the casket, and the man blocking his way. His sacred duty, and Jason's sacrifice, was about to be challenged in a way he hadn't anticipated. The employee, his name tag read Mark Evans, wore a navy blue Delta Airlines uniform. His face was unreadable, his gaze sweeping over David and the casket as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience in his workday. "You can't go through here," Evans repeated, his voice just as flat, his raised hand forming an invisible barrier. David's military composure was tested by the unexpected resistance. He took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm as it cut through the background noise of the airport. "I'm Colonel David Carter, United States Army. I am on a mission to escort the remains of a fallen soldier home. This is Private First Class Jason Reynolds. He was killed in action. I need to board Delta Flight 247 to return him to his family." He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word carrying the weight of the solemn duty he was performing. He hoped Evans would understand the gravity of the situation, but Mark Evans remained unmoved. He crossed his arms over his chest, narrowed his eyes, and spoke in an even firmer tone. "I don't care who you are or what you're doing. Security protocol does not allow any item like this to pass through the checkpoint without special documentation. Do you have a permit?" David felt a wave of heat rush down his spine. He had escorted fallen soldiers dozens of times throughout his career, and never had he encountered such an unreasonable demand. The military always coordinated with airlines to ensure a smooth process. And his paperwork, everything from official orders to clearance documents, had already been sent to Delta in advance. "I have all the necessary paperwork," he replied, pulling a neatly folded set of documents from his jacket pocket. "This is an order from the Army Command, along with confirmation from your airline. I contacted Delta's management 3 days ago." Evans barely glanced at the papers before pushing them back toward David, his tone now laced with disdain. "I don't have time to read all this. Rules are rules. Without a special permit from airport security management, you're not going through. Take that coffin somewhere else and stop holding up the line." The words cut deep, like a knife to David's pride. His fists clenched as frustration boiled within him. "This coffin," he said, his voice now lower but as sharp as a blade, "holds the remains of a soldier who gave his life for this country. He is not an item. He is Private First Class Jason Reynolds, and it is my duty to bring him home to his family." But Evans merely shrugged, his dismissive attitude leaving David momentarily stunned. "I don't know who he is. And I don't care," Evans replied in a monotone voice, as if reciting from a script. "If you don't like it, take it up with someone higher up. I'm just following regulations." He turned away, motioning to a nearby security officer as if to have David removed from the area. David remained still, his breathing heavy. In 30 years of service, he had faced countless challenges, from enemy fire on the battlefield to life or death decisions, but never had he felt this kind of insult. Not for himself, but for Jason, the young soldier who had sacrificed everything, now being treated as nothing more than an inconvenience. "Listen," David said, his voice now carrying a rare hint of anger. "I'm not asking for any special treatment for myself. I'm asking for the basic respect due to a soldier who died for this country. His family is waiting on the other side, and I promised to bring him home. You can't just ignore this." But Evans turned back, his expression cold and arrogant. "I'm not ignoring it," he said. "I'm doing my job. If you don't have the permit right now, step aside. There's a line of people waiting to get through." He gestured toward the queue of passengers, some of whom were beginning to glance over with mild curiosity, though most remained absorbed in their own travel routines. David felt the blood rush to his head. He wasn't worried about himself. He could stand here all day if necessary, but he was worried about Jason. About his promise to Jason's family. About how this delay would only deepen their grief. He looked down at the flag-draped coffin, the American flag with its white stars gleaming under the airport lights, and felt a sharp ache in his chest. "You deserve better than this, Jason," he murmured, his voice catching in his throat. He turned back to Evans, and this time, his voice was no longer restrained. "Do you even know what he did? He gave his life to protect people like you, so you could stand here and do your job without fear of bombs and bullets. And you have the audacity to tell me he can't board this plane because of protocol." Evans smirked, unfazed. "Don't lecture me," he shot back. "I'm not military. I'm an airline employee, and I follow my rules. If you want to get through, get a permit. Otherwise, stop wasting my time." He turned away again, leaving David standing there, gripping the handle of the cart tightly, his chest filled with both fury and helplessness. The crowd around them was beginning to take notice. Some people stopped walking. A few curious eyes turned toward the scene. David knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just an insult, it was a blatant disregard for Jason's sacrifice. Something he could never let go unchallenged. The air in the security checkpoint of Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport grew heavy as Mark Evans, a Delta Airlines employee, walked away, leaving Colonel David Carter standing beside the flag-draped coffin of Private First Class Jason Reynolds. The usual airport noise, the footsteps, the chatter, the overhead announcements, continued, but now, an unusual silence seemed to settle around David. He stood there, hands gripping the cart, eyes sharp as he watched Evans walk off, his anger burning beneath the surface, held back only by the discipline of a veteran soldier. The insult wasn't just to him, it was to Jason, the young soldier who had given everything, and that, more than anything, was an offense he could not accept. But the incident wasn't forgotten as easily as Evans had hoped. The surrounding crowd, once preoccupied with their luggage and schedules, began to take notice. A middle-aged man in a denim jacket stopped pulling his suitcase, turning to look at David and the casket with a furrowed brow. A young mother pushing a stroller paused, her gaze shifting between Evans and David with confusion. Murmurs started to ripple through the crowd. "What's going on? A casket? Did someone die? They're not letting him through," spreading like small waves across the terminal. David remained silent, but he could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The curious glances gradually transformed into looks of discontent as people registered the significance of his pristine military uniform and the American flag draped over the casket. Suddenly, a deep, commanding voice cut through the growing whispers. "Hey, what's going on here?" A tall, broad-shouldered man, likely in his 40s, pushed through the crowd with an air of confidence. He wore a tight black t-shirt that revealed a Marine Corps eagle tattoo on his left arm. His tanned face was lined with experience, his eyes carrying the hardened resolve of someone who had seen combat. "Name's Jack Riley," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "Former Marine, served 12 years. I just heard you say you're escorting a fallen soldier. Why aren't they letting you through?" Jack stepped up beside David, his sharp gaze shifting from the colonel to Evans, who now turned back with visible irritation. David nodded, his voice steady but firm. "I'm Colonel David Carter, escorting Private First Class Jason Reynolds home. He was killed in an explosion last week." But this airline employee says I can't board the flight because of security protocol, even though I have all the necessary paperwork." He held up the neatly folded documents again, his eyes locking onto Jack's. Jack's gaze dropped to the casket, and for a brief moment, his shoulders tensed as he took in the sight of the flag. Then, slowly, he turned to Evans, his voice sharp as a blade. "You told him what?" he said, his tone now laced with quiet fury. "You're denying a fallen soldier his way home because of some bureaucratic nonsense? Do you have any idea what he sacrificed for this country?" Evans scowled, stepping closer to Jack, his voice rising in an attempt to assert dominance. "I don't need you telling me how to do my job. These are airline regulations, and I have the authority to enforce them. If you don't like it, go file a complaint." But Jack didn't back down. He took a step forward, jabbing a finger toward Evans, his voice a low growl. "Your regulations mean nothing when they disrespect a fallen soldier. Who the hell do you think you are, treating him like this?" By now, the entire crowd was fully engaged. Phones were raised, cameras recording, murmurs turning into a steady rumble of discontent. Then, a young woman, no older than 20, stepped out from the crowd. She had pink-dyed hair and wore an oversized hoodie. Holding up her phone, the screen glowed with the words, "Live streaming," on a popular social media app. "Hey everyone," she called out, her voice shaking slightly but filled with determination. "My name's Mia, I'm at Birmingham Airport, and you won't believe what's happening. A military colonel is trying to escort the remains of a fallen soldier home. But Delta Airlines won't let him board because of something called security protocol. Look." She turned the camera toward David, the flag-draped casket, then panned over to Evans, whose expression soured at being recorded. "This is how they treat those who protect us," Mia continued, her voice growing louder. "I need everyone watching to share this right now." Her words were like gasoline on an open flame. The crowd erupted. "Shame on you. Let him through. What the hell is Delta thinking?" While others began posting photos and videos to social media. Jack pressed on, his voice unwavering. "Do you have a family, Evans? Can you imagine how they'd feel if it was you in that casket? Being treated like this?" Evans took a step back, clearly overwhelmed, though he still tried to maintain his authority. "I don't have to listen to this. I'm just doing my job." But his voice wavered, lacking the confidence he had before. Meanwhile, David remained still, his hand resting on the casket, his expression a mix of anger and sorrow. He hadn't wanted this to turn into a public spectacle. He only wanted to bring Jason home with the dignity he deserved. But he also knew the outrage in the room wasn't just for him, it was for Jason. For the sacrifice that was being dismissed so callously. Mia's voice rang out again as she kept filming. "Everyone, use the hashtag justice for Jason and spread this. We can't let them get away with this." Her phone buzzed non-stop as hundreds of viewers began flooding the comments, sharing the video, and demanding answers. Evans quickly lost control of the situation. Another airport security officer approached him, whispering something urgent, but Evans just shoved the hand away, his face flushed with frustration and confusion. The crowd was no longer just curious onlookers, they were witnesses. They were outraged, and with the power of social media, they were turning this incident into an unstoppable storm. David glanced around, feeling an unexpected strength rising from these strangers who had come together in this moment. He whispered to Jason, "You will get home, I promise, and they will not forget you." Now, the security checkpoint at Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport had become an emotional battleground. The crowd's angry shouts drowned out the overhead flight announcements as Colonel David Carter stood steadfast beside Private First Class Jason Reynolds' flag-draped casket, his gaze both resolute and pained. Jack Riley, the former Marine, remained locked in a tense standoff with Mark Evans, his voice booming like thunder as he condemned the airline employee's blatant disrespect. Meanwhile, Mia, the young woman with pink hair, kept her livestream rolling, her hands trembling from both anger and determination. "Everyone, share this now. Hashtag justice for Jason. We cannot let them treat a fallen soldier like this," she cried, The crowd around her lifted their phones high, recording, snapping pictures, and fueling a wildfire of public outrage that could no longer be contained. Within minutes, the incident exploded beyond the airport walls. Mia's video spread like wildfire across social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, gaining thousands of views and shares in real time. The hashtag Justice for Jason skyrocketed to the top of trending lists, accompanied by a flood of furious comments. What the hell is Delta thinking? A soldier dies for his country, and they won't let him board a flight home, one user posted. Disgusting. Boycott Delta now, another demanded. Veteran groups, military organizations, and even public figures began amplifying the story, transforming David and Jason's ordeal into a national outrage. The pressure was building, and the airline was running out of time to respond. At the airport, Mark Evans began to feel the heat. He took a step back, his face flushed with anger and panic, his initial arrogance now completely gone. Another security officer rushed over, whispering something urgently, but Evans shoved his hand away. "I've got this under control," he snapped. Then, turning to the crowd, he tried to assert dominance. "Everyone, disperse. This is an internal airline matter, it's none of your business." But his words only added fuel to the fire. Jack Riley stepped forward, pointing directly at Evans. "Internal matter? You just disrespected a fallen soldier. And you think we're going to stay silent?" The crowd erupted in agreement. "Let him on the plane," someone shouted. "Apologize, Delta," another voice demanded. The chants grew louder, anger rippling through the terminal. Delta headquarters, Atlanta. Meanwhile, at Delta's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, the public relations team was in full crisis mode. In a tense conference room, multiple screens flashed with an overwhelming flood of social media notifications, angry customer emails, and press inquiries. Linda Hayes, a senior executive, slammed her hand on the table in frustration. "What the hell is happening in Birmingham? Someone explain, now." A nervous assistant handed her a phone playing Mia's livestream. The video showed Colonel David Carter standing beside the flag-draped casket, while Evans' dismissive voice echoed through the room. "I don't care who he was. No paperwork, no boarding." As the words played out, Hayes' face turned pale. "Oh my God," she whispered, "we are finished if we don't fix this immediately." But it was already too late. The backlash, the outrage had spread far beyond Delta's control. Major veterans organizations, including the American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars, released statements condemning the airline's actions and calling for a boycott. "This is a disgrace to every service member who has sacrificed for this country," one spokesperson declared. National news outlets, CNN, Fox News, BBC, picked up the story, blasting headlines across screens. Delta Airlines denies military escort for fallen soldier. Politicians quickly joined in, from local representatives to U.S. senators, demanding accountability from Delta. On social media, #BoycottDelta began trending alongside #Justice for Jason, turning the controversy into a full-blown PR nightmare. At the airport, the crowd continued to intensify the pressure. An older woman, holding a photograph of a young soldier, shouted, "My son also died in Iraq. You have no right to do this." A group of college students started chanting, "Justice for Jason, justice for Jason." Mia, still live streaming, panned her camera around to capture the growing movement. "Do you see this, everyone? People here are standing up for Colonel Carter and Private Reynolds. Delta can't ignore this any longer." Her livestream viewership surged past 50,000, with thousands of comments pouring in. "Delta needs to apologize. Who do they think they are?" Delta's failed response. Finally, Delta Airlines responded, but it only made things worse. A hastily written statement appeared on their official Twitter account. "We are reviewing the situation in Birmingham and are committed to resolving it quickly." Delta has always respected service members and their families. But the tweet was immediately drowned in a tidal wave of outrage. "Reviewing what? You refused a fallen soldier," one user replied. "Explain, don't deflect," another demanded. Within minutes, Delta's stock began to plummet on the stock market, a clear signal that this crisis couldn't be salvaged with empty corporate statements. The unstoppable movement. Back at the airport, Colonel David Carter remained still, his hand resting on the casket, his eyes locked onto the American flag. He never wanted this to become a public spectacle, he only wanted to bring Jason home with dignity. But as the crowd chanted Jason's name, as Jack Riley continued confronting Evans, and as Mia's livestream amplified their voices across the world, David felt an unexpected force rising around him. This was no longer just his fight, it belonged to everyone who had ever understood the cost of a soldier's sacrifice. He whispered to Jason, "Do you hear them? They're standing up for you." Mark Evans was now completely surrounded. A senior Delta manager at the airport rushed over, his face pale with panic. He tried to whisper something to Evans, but Evans only shouted, "I followed protocol, I did nothing wrong." But no one believed him anymore. The crowd, social media, and the entire world had already delivered their verdict. Delta had made an unforgivable mistake. At Delta's headquarters in Atlanta, Linda Hayes barked orders over the phone. "Get him on that plane now. Do whatever it takes to shut this down." But it was too late. The alarms had sounded, and the fallout had spiraled beyond their control. A storm of public outrage. At Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport, the uproar had transformed the security checkpoint into an unlikely battleground for justice. Colonel David Carter remained unmoved, his hand resting on the flag-draped casket of Private Jason Reynolds. He didn't flinch, even as the deafening roar of the crowd surrounded him. Jack Riley, the former Marine, continued confronting Mark Evans, while Mia, the pink-haired activist, kept live-streaming the moment, pushing #Justice for Jason and #Boycott Delta to the top of social media trends. Public outrage exploded. Veterans organizations and news networks joined the fight, plunging Delta into a historical crisis. But now, at last, the true moment of reckoning had arrived. The reckoning begins. Through the chaos, a man in a gray suit, wearing a Delta management badge, hurried toward the scene from behind the check-in counter. He appeared to be in his early 40s, his face flushed with stress. In one hand, he clutched a stack of papers. With a forced, uneasy smile, he raised his voice to be heard over the shouting. "I'm Richard Bennett, Delta's regional manager here in Birmingham." He stepped closer to David, offering a stiff, awkward bow before speaking in a tone that was overly sweet yet clearly insincere. "Colonel Carter, I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. We never intended to disrespect you or Private Reynolds. This was simply a miscommunication on our end." He forced a sympathetic expression and held out his hand for a handshake. "I personally guarantee that we will get you on this flight immediately. Please accept our deepest apologies." But David did not move. He locked eyes with Bennett, his gaze sharp, burning with 30 years of restrained fury from his time in service. Then, he took a step forward, his voice low but as sharp as a blade. "Apologize? You think an apology is enough? I provided all the proper documentation. I explained my mission clearly. But your employee, this man, Evans, said that he," David pointed to the casket, "wasn't worthy of being on this plane because of protocol. And you call that a misunderstanding? This wasn't a miscommunication. This was blatant disrespect toward a soldier who gave his life for this country." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, while Bennett instinctively stepped back, his phony smile disappearing. Jack Riley cut in, his voice booming. "That's right, don't act like this was some accident. You made a choice, you chose to dismiss him, and now you're only apologizing because you got caught." Mia swung her camera back to Bennett, still live streaming. "You hear that, everyone? They're only apologizing because we forced them to, not because they actually care." Her livestream soared past 100,000 viewers, with thousands of comments flooding in. "Hold them accountable. Don't let Delta sweep this under the rug." Bennett raised his hands, trying to regain control. "We will get Colonel Carter on the next flight immediately. Everything will be resolved." But no one believed him anymore. David shook his head, his voice turning cold. commanding, "I don't need your fake assistance. I need real respect, not just for me, but for Jason and his family. You failed to give that from the very beginning. And now? It's too late." He turned back toward the casket, his eyes softening for a brief moment, as if offering a silent apology to Jason. The crowd fell into a hushed silence, feeling the weight of his words. Then, another sound broke through the chaos. From the airport entrance came the steady, commanding footsteps of a group of uniformed military personnel. At the front of the group was Colonel Michael Torres from U.S. Army Command. He walked straight to David, extended his hand, and spoke loud and clear. "Colonel Carter, we were just informed about this situation. The military has arranged for a C-130 transport aircraft from Maxwell Air Force Base to bring you and Private Reynolds home. The plane will arrive in 20 minutes. We will not allow you, or him, to be at the mercy of people who don't understand the true value of sacrifice." The crowd exploded in applause, and Mia shouted into the livestream, "The military has stepped in. Justice for Jason is here." Bennett stood frozen, his face turned pale, his hands trembling as he realized Delta had lost its last chance to make things right. David gave Torres a firm nod, his eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction. "Thank you, Colonel. This is the treatment Jason deserves." Then, he turned to Bennett and Evans one last time, his voice low but cutting like steel. "You should learn to respect those who sacrificed everything, before the world teaches you that lesson itself." His words landed like a hammer blow, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The fallout was inevitable. As news of the military aircraft intervention spread, the backlash against Delta intensified. Delta's stock plummeted another 12% in just a few hours, wiping out hundreds of millions in market value. Veteran organizations called for a full-scale boycott. Thousands of customers canceled their tickets, switching to rival airlines. A group of high-profile attorneys announced plans to sue Delta for discrimination and emotional distress, with David and Jason's family as potential plaintiffs. Decades of carefully built reputation, gone in a single day. And no corporate apology could undo the damage. At the airport, David watched as the military personnel carefully lifted Jason's casket onto a specialized transport vehicle, ready to take him to the waiting C-130 on the tarmac. He turned to Jack Riley, shaking his hand. "Thank you for speaking up." Jack nodded. "It's the least I could do for him." Mia, having ended her livestream, ran up and hugged David. "You're a hero, Colonel." David smiled faintly, but his eyes remained on Jason. "No, he's the hero." As the vehicle carrying Jason's casket pulled away, the crowd fell silent, heads bowed in respect. Justice had been served, not through empty apologies, but through action, unity, and the unwavering refusal to accept injustice. For Delta, this was a costly lesson. For David, this was the sweetest revenge, bringing Jason home with the honor he deserved. The C-130 transport plane landed at a small regional airport near the hometown of Private First Class Jason Reynolds in the late afternoon, carrying Colonel David Carter and the fallen soldiers' remains. There was no more chaos of Birmingham Airport, no more crowds, no more arrogance from Delta Airlines, only the quiet of rural Alabama. Fields stretched far and wide, and the trees stood still in the golden glow of sunset. The homecoming. As the aircraft's doors opened, an honor guard from the U.S. Army stepped forward, their movements slow and solemn. With utmost reverence, they lifted the flag-draped casket and carried it down to the tarmac. David followed closely behind, his uniform crisp, his eyes reflecting both relief and sorrow as he spotted Jason's family waiting nearby. A farewell in honor. Jason's mother, Linda Reynolds, clung tightly to her husband, Tom, as tears streamed down her face at the sight of her son's casket. Her hands trembled, yet she stood tall, holding herself together against an unbearable grief. Beside her, Tom Reynolds, a tall, rugged man with the weathered face of a farmer, held her hand firmly. His eyes were red, yet they never left the casket. David stepped forward, bowing his head before them, his voice low and sincere. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Colonel David Carter. I am deeply sorry for your loss. I promised to bring Jason home. And now he's here. He removed the flag from the casket, carefully folding it into a perfect triangle with the assistance of another officer. Then, he placed it in Linda's hands. He served his country with courage and honor, David said, his voice tight with emotion. Please accept this as a token of our gratitude. Linda clutched the flag to her chest, tears falling onto the fabric. She whispered, "Thank you, Colonel. Thank you for not leaving my son behind." Tom placed a strong hand on David's shoulder, his voice hoarse. "We heard about what happened at the airport. You fought for him. We don't have the words to thank you enough." David nodded, his gaze softening. "I didn't do it alone. So many people stood up for Jason, they refused to let him be forgotten." Jason's final resting place. The ceremony was brief, held in a solemn silence, as the haunting notes of taps echoed through the air. Jason was laid to rest with the honor he deserved. David stood still, watching as the Reynolds family held each other, weeping. His mission was complete, not just in bringing Jason home, but in defending his honor. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, chaos engulfed Delta's headquarters, following the military's intervention and David's outright rejection of Richard Bennett's insincere apology. The airline faced severe consequences. Delta's downfall. The next day, Delta's stock plummeted another 8%, bringing total losses into the billions. Boycott campaigns spread like wildfire, with tens of thousands of customers publicly canceling flights and switching to competitors like American Airlines and Southwest. A team of attorneys, representing both the Reynolds family and veterans organizations, filed a lawsuit against Delta, accusing the airline of discrimination and emotional distress, seeking millions in damages. News outlets ran scathing headlines. "The Fall of Delta: A Lesson in Unforgivable Mistakes." The controversy exploded online, marking an irreversible stain in the airline's history. A desperate attempt at damage control. Delta's executives scrambled, holding an emergency press conference, but their efforts proved futile. CEO Edward Grayson appeared exhausted as he read a scripted statement. "We acknowledge the serious mistakes made in handling the situation in Birmingham and are committed to improving our policies to better honor military personnel and their families." But the public wasn't buying it. Social media erupted with backlash. "Too late. You only care because you're losing money. Respect can't be bought." A costly lesson. What happened to Delta became a stark warning. Disrespecting those who sacrifice for their country, and failing to uphold social responsibility, leads to consequences that cannot be undone. The online community and the witnesses at the airport didn't just stop at criticism, they took action for justice, turning a small incident into a powerful movement. Jack Riley, a former Marine, appeared on a local news program, recalling the moment he confronted Evans. "I couldn't stand by and watch a soldier be treated that way. We owe them more than that." Mia, the young woman who live-streamed the event, received thousands of messages of gratitude. She later posted a video, saying, "Thank you all for sharing. This is the power we have when we stand together." Veterans organizations launched fundraising efforts to support the Reynolds family, transforming their pain into a symbol of honor and unity. That night, David Carter returned home to his small room in Birmingham, gazing at an old photo of his battalion hanging on the wall. He thought about Jason, his family, and the strangers who had stood up for him. David never sought attention or recognition, he only wanted to fulfill his duty. But this event had shown him something profound. When a community stands together, justice isn't just a promise, it's a true force. He picked up his phone and called Colonel Torres to thank him for the military's support. Before ending the call, David said one simple sentence: "We did the right thing for him." The events at the airport were not just a victory for David or a defeat for Delta. They were proof of the power of small voices coming together as one. Jason Reynolds was brought home with honor, and Delta learned a valuable lesson: the sacrifice of a soldier must never be taken lightly. But this story is not over. It serves as a reminder that justice must be upheld by all of us. The story of Colonel David Carter and Private First Class Jason Reynolds did not end when the C-130 landed or when Delta faced public outrage. It lives on as a powerful message that discrimination and disrespect have no place in a society that values quiet sacrifices. David did what he knew was right. He brought Jason home with dignity, despite obstacles from an indifferent system. But he didn't do it alone. Jack Riley, Mia, the crowd at the airport, and millions online stood with him, turning a single incident into a powerful movement for justice. Delta learned a costly lesson. Arrogance and irresponsibility come at a price, not just in reputation and financial losses, but in the trust of the people. More importantly, this story proves that courage and unity can bring about real change. Jason Reynolds, a young soldier with simple dreams, gave his life to protect others. His sacrifice is not just a loss for his family, it is a call for all of us to honor those who put their country above themselves. David Carter understood this, and he fought to ensure that Jason's honor was not buried beneath meaningless protocols. But how many more Jasons are out there, forgotten, overlooked, with no one to stand up for them? What happened at Birmingham Airport was a victory, but it was also just the beginning. Justice doesn't happen on its own, it requires action, voices, and the courage to refuse silence in the face of injustice. Now, this story belongs to you, the ones who have followed David and Jason's journey. We cannot change the past, but we can shape the future. Speak up when you witness injustice. Stand up for those who have no voice, and always honor those who have sacrificed for their country. This is not just the responsibility of soldiers like David, it is the responsibility of all of us. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced disrespect like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your voice. Every comment, every share is a small step toward keeping the fire of justice burning. If this story resonates with you, hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss more journeys of courage and justice. Together, we can make a difference, just like David, Jack, Mia, and the community did for Jason. Because a world without injustice starts with us.